All right, welcome back to Invisible Machines. Got a really fun episode for you today. We are talking with Peter Greenberg, who is an Emmy award-winning investigative reporter and producer, and according to his website, is America's most recognized, honored, and respected frontline travel news journalist. He paints a pretty stark picture for us of what might be going wrong in travel and hospitality and how AI, the technologies associated with AI, might not be doing what we would hope they would do. So it's a pretty fascinating conversation. Elias, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this one came together, because I know there's a good story there.
Sure. Yeah. So some folks will have already clued into the fact that we're doing some sort of mini series within the Invisible Machines show. We've got one we're developing on knowledge and search, and then we're doing a series on practical application of conversational AI and related technologies in different industries. Hospitality is one of them. It seemed like a interesting avenue to dive into for a whole host of reasons. One of them, however, was that, Rob, you've been thinking about the space for a while, and over the years have dipped into helping with different innovative projects and changing the employee experience or the customer experience in hospitality. Even going back to I think 2009 or something like that, 2010, with another guest that's coming on the show in season 2, Tim Wood from Amazon, who's leading AI stuff over at Amazon. So a lot of thought and a lot of history intersecting with hospitality, but we're at a new moment with what's happening with the space and how it's intersecting with AI. And so it seemed like it would be an exciting thing to bring somebody in that's been thinking about hospitality for a long time. And Peter was a name that came up a number of times as we were starting to research potential guests. He's somewhat of a household name because he's done a lot of great work, both reporting on destinations and the traveler experience, as well as industry and what's happening behind the scenes. He's done some impressive award-winning reporting actually on some industry changes and impacts and things. And so he's also a very opinionated person. He knows his stuff. He's thought about a lot of the stuff. He's not scared to say what he really thinks. There's even a little bit of roasting that happens. He's a lot of fun and very entertaining to have a conversation with. There is a cool backstory also that, if I can take another minute to explain, a really strange coincidence. When I first got a hold of Peter Greenberg, maybe 2 minutes into the conversation, he interrupted me and told me I'm talking with the wrong Peter Greenberg, and I was trying to get the Peter Greenberg I was actually looking for is the bad Peter Greenberg, and the one I was talking with is the good one. And he explained, and we actually had a great conversation for 15 minutes. This is another Peter Greenberg that works in hospitality, but is on the investment side of the industry. And they've actually met. They seem to be friendly with each other. I'm not sure how well they know each other, but we had this great conversation about hospitality from an investment perspective that was unexpected and actually ended up helping a lot with the research for this episode with the other Peter Greenberg. So the way that he's orienting to AI was really fascinating. It's very numbers and finance and investment perspective, which is part of where the conversation in this episode goes with the other Peter Greenberg. And I got, in this 15-minute conversation, I got to see his mind change about what these technologies can be to the space. Everything was about numbers and finance, and we started talking through some examples of stories that where AI is being used to change the employee experience, being used to change the customer experience, and not driven from a revenue hungry perspective, but actually just trying to improve employee and customer experiences. And we talked through the example of the Humans coffee shop in Kyiv, Ukraine, which was from another episode of Invisible Machines. And I think it inspired it. It changed his mind. He grabbed onto it. He had questions. It actually turned into him making introductions to a larger hospitality group that he's an investor in, to their CTO and I believe chief of staff. And it was strange and interesting because I watched him, what was so exciting to him about this big group that he's an investor in is he believes they're on the front lines of delivering better employee and customer experiences. That's like what he loves about them. But then everything he was thinking about with the power of AI was purely centered in numbers and deals and investment, and very like detached from the human experience with employees and customers.
Yeah, when you told me the story, I thought it was really coincidental, but fascinating because you got, each Peter Greenberg thought the other one was the bad Peter Greenberg, and you get that in our episode.
Half joking, yeah.
But yeah, I know, on both sides. But
yeah.
What's interesting is I think a lot of people think this idea for bottom line hunger is driven purely from greed, and I think, of course, there is to some degree that element of it in there. But it also became clear that the investor, Peter Greenberg, was very open to the idea of how AI could enhance the experience of employees and of
he
customers.
went from open to like in love with it. Yeah.
Right. And so it just kind of showed that he just spends every day in the numbers, in the spreadsheets, and it's just kind of where he lives and breathes. So it just was where his mind was going. And that once you opened it to like, hey, AI can do more than just help with the bottom line or the top line, it can actually improve the experience. It wasn't that he was against that. It was that he was very open to it. It just isn't where his head is on a day-to-day basis, because it's not as easily reflected in the spreadsheet. And I think we talk about that in the episode, that if it's hard to measure, you can't put it in a spreadsheet. It's absent from his conversation. And so the absence of it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about it. It just means it's just not present. And that once you sort of have that conversation, he's more than open to it. So I guess me being the opposite, the optimist, it shows a lot of promise that this can be solved, right? We're not talking about bad intentions. Maybe we're just talking about awareness. And if AI can help bring a reliable measurement of customer experience beyond just numbers, that maybe there's a easier bridge here than we think, to solving this problem with technology. But yeah, it was a great conversation. I love the fact that the customer advocate, Peter Greenberg, that we're about to talk to, I like that he's very skeptical of AI. I think it's clear that his skepticism comes from not the tools. He actually respects the tools. He thinks that they're very powerful. But I think he also understands that power in the hands of somebody that's just focused on the bottom line is ultra dangerous to us as consumers, especially when it's a gamified thing of who can get the better of the other on price. So I felt like he was very open to that. I thought it was a great conversation. I just liked it because I think we had a lot more pushback than normal on the technology, which I really enjoyed, and I hope the audience enjoys it too.
He kind of wasn't
great
having
conversation.
Just to go with one thing that you said there, I believe he said something like he has a very optimistic view of technology and a very pessimistic view of people running businesses and hospitality, which is interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into it.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited for this conversation. I was actually watching the keynote, I think, that you gave at the Hospitality Leadership Summit back in 2021. And you were talking about two of the top two complaints that were filed with the U.S. Department of Transportation, I think that year, that they came in record numbers, and they were an inability to get refunds on canceled trips, and then also the lack of transparency, essentially, with the insurance policies that were kind of attached to a lot of these travel products. And you mentioned, I think, $9 billion in unrefunded ticket costs mounting up, which just seems crazy. And I guess my question to you, having recently, actually Elias Parker, our producer, were sharing similar experiences yesterday, being at the airport, and there's like that company Clear that kind of offers you expedited passage through the security gates, and they were just kind of pulling people out of line who were in a hurry and ushering them over to this queue, they weren't really distinguishing themselves as non-airport employees. And then, you're kind of rushed into this situation where you're all of a sudden giving biometric data to someone in a hurry, which is kind of a strange feeling, I think, for a lot of people, I would assume. And so I guess the question I have is, how is hospitality doing, do you think, in terms of like rebuilding some of the trust that kind of it needs to do? And is technology kind of playing a part in that in your experience?
Well, I'm going to be a little harsh. Hospitality is doing a terrible job. They're doing a terrible job because they're so seduced by the technology as an opportunity to cut costs and to basically interrupt human interaction that they're doing themselves, not to mention people like us, a great disservice. Anytime I get to a hotel and they steer me to a kiosk, I leave the hotel. Every time I get to an airport and they don't want to do customer service, they want to steer me to a kiosk, it drives me nuts. And I try to explain to them, well, why don't you want to use the kiosk? I said, because I'm trying to keep your job. Right now, the more that you get me to a kiosk, the less time you're going to be employed. And I remember not that long ago, I had a ticketing issue, and there were 9 people behind the counter at United Airlines, and there's nobody in line. So I figured, okay, I'll get it solved. And I walked over there and I said, hey, can somebody help me out with this ticket? And everyone said, oh, we don't do ticketing here. We only solve kiosk problems. And I said, guys, the kiosk is your problem. I mean, give me a break. And every time a hotel announces an innovation, it's just one step closer to a deterioration of service. And worse, a deterioration of communication and the elimination of conversation. And conversation, if anybody hasn't figured this out yet, is a core component of hospitality. So the answer to your question is, they're doing a terrible job. They think they're doing a great job because the accountants running these corporations can show you the ROI, but there's not. They may get an ROI, but they're not going to get an ROI in terms of satisfaction.
Right. So we see this a lot. We like look at customers on a regular basis that are evaluating conversation as a technology. We now know that machines can do an incredible job at conversing, and the first place they go is, where do we get the money to pay for this? We have to save money in order to pay for this technology. Who can we cut? What jobs can we cut? How much does a phone call cost? How much are you going to charge me to automate that phone call? And then my CFO will approve the project, and then they run a test to see if it actually saves that money, knowing that like these things take time to prove themselves out, versus what you're saying, and we run into this constantly. Right. Okay, go ahead.
But there's something else, and that's this. And I'll give it to you as it happened about 8 years ago, but the principle is still the same. The transportation and hospitality industry doesn't understand value. They understand cost, but they don't understand value. I was on a flight. I used to live on the transcons between LA and New York all the time. I was on it twice a week in both directions. And you get used to a rhythm. You know what sound like. You know what movements move like. And I'm on the plane one day, and why am I on the flight? Let's just be honest. I'm not on the flight for the rich Corinthian leather. I'm not on the flight for the Broadway show tunes that the flight attendants are not going to be performing on board. I'm on the flight to go from point A to point B and not die. Very simple. So, but there's one thing on that flight, and I picked the flight for a reason. I had to get to New York anyway, right? The one thing I always picked about that flight was that on that particular flight, everybody in business class got an ice cream sundae. So get ready. So a ticket on that plane that was not being paid for by me, paid for by the network, was about $2,200 round trip. And as I get on the plane, I pre-boarded because I'm one of those mileage poobahs, which means nothing anymore. But this is a couple of years ago. I pre-board, I'm sitting in my seat, and the flight attendant comes over and hands me the menu. And the minute I get the menu, I see something's missing. The ice cream sundae. And I called her over, and nobody had boarded the plane yet. I said, what happened to the ice cream sundae? Oh, we didn't think it was cost effective, so we removed it. I said, let me ask you something. There are 12 seats in this business class section. If American Airlines made the worst ice cream purchasing deal in the history of food, your total cost per ice cream sundae might be $5. 5 times 12 is $60. The only thing that people are valuing on this flight is that stupid ice cream sundae. You're going to have a revolution on your hands. Oh, no. Okay, watch. You shouldn't believe it. People came on that plane and one by one, what? The what? And you know what happened? I said, there's somebody back in Dallas who was in accounting, who was in an orgasmic frenzy because he saved $60 per flight on stupid ice cream.
Right.
You just lost, ready, $24,000 in revenue because people are going to book away from the airline. And they did. And only then did they realize it was time to put back the ice cream sundae. That is an example of what we're dealing with today, only replace it with technology. It's the same problem.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet jockey that wanted to get a raise said, hey, I moved this, I zeroed out this cell, and like, what do you know? It saves money. But then somebody above him said, oh, that's a good idea. No one cares about these Sundays. No one's going to complain. And went ahead and greenlit it. And then...
Right.
And that's like an interesting product of what I would almost call explore exploit with these companies, where they, in the beginning, they're trying to find a good business model. They're exploring different things. They're trying to find great experiences. Then at some point they pivot over to like, okay, how do we start like making margins grow and grow and grow? Because, now it's all about, improving the profit margins instead of enhancing the experience. So
right.
It's interesting because I think you can easily see the hump as in like, first you're exploring, revenues growing, companies becoming more successful. Then you start exploiting. And then soon after, the company starts going down. And if it wasn't for the delay, the feedback loop delay, everybody would understand that the activities have an effect and what effect these are happening, but the delayed response. And now it comes back to AI and saying like, that's a human problem. AI doesn't care about time. It can correlate hours. It can correlate years. It doesn't, it has a forever memory, whereas we forget the decisions we made, and we don't necessarily correlate the responses to decisions that happened years or months before. And so maybe these decisions shouldn't be left up to people. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but maybe these types,
I would argue the opposite. I would argue the opposite, because while AI can run the numbers, AI can't tell you my emotional connection with ice cream. And there's your problem. Let me give you the flip side of that. In the hospitality industry, technology again. If there's one thing I hate at a hotel, it's the Darth Vader minibar. The Darth Vader minibar is the one that everything in that bar has an opportunity to be coded so that if you remove the can, you're already charged for it. It's sort of like, you come anywhere near the minibar, it's like, step away from the Diet Coke, because you're about to get charged. Okay. So there's a hotel in London that wanted to raise their room rate about $30 a night. And their marketing guy said to them, oh no, our projections say if you do that, you won't be competitive because you'll be outside of our competitive set. And the answer that the hotel gave their marketing people was this: we want to be competitive in value, not in rate. So what did they do? Something brilliant. They said, were getting rid of all the mini bars. They trashed them. In their place, they went back to the future and got just regular refrigerators like you and I would have in our own house, put them in each room, and filled those refrigerators with candy and fruit and soft drinks and fruit juices, everything non-alcoholic, cookies, and made it all free. And raised the roommate $30 a night. Okay? Guess what happened? Occupancy went up 7%. Nobody bitched about the rate because nobody in their mind, the minute they were getting there, had to go to their wallet to buy a $12 Snickers bar. You would have to have been a barricaded suspect locked in your room for 2 days to consume all the stuff that was in that mini bar. But the true definition of hospitality is options. People love the idea that they had the option to eat the cookie without having to pay for it. Now, were they paying for it? Of course they were. Were they being hit over the head with it? They weren't. And once again, there's some guy in accounting who's very upset because they weren't getting mini bar revenue, but they were making $30 more a night per room, and nobody was bitching. So it's the nickel and dime mentality coupled with this embrace of technology that is not a good recipe.
So one thing we've seen is that, we imagine that human to human is like a close relationship just based on being human to human. But one could argue that these guys were out of touch with their customers. Like to not know that they were going to complain about the Sundays is really just to not know your customer at the end of the day. And we understand why. There's so many customers.
But how do you get there?
Right. And that's a question of, can AI know your customer better than you because it talks to them more often? In other words, couldn't something have just asked you, what do you think about, like, would it upset you if we got rid of the Sunday? And they could have just done 10 people and known.
But wait. Right, but here's the problem with focus groups. Focus groups are phony. They're fraudulent. They're completely misleading because it's not whether or not AI can talk to the customers. Of course they can, or of course it can, but it's the way the questions are asked. And most focus groups are asked questions in such a loaded way that they're already preloaded to get the people the answer they wanted in the first place, not to actually tell them what's going on. Right? So instead of saying, you like paying $9 for a Snickers bar, they would ask the question saying, would you like the convenience of just being able to have a Snickers bar and just have it automatically on your bill?
Yeah.
Without telling them it's $9 and it sucks. Right?
Yeah.
So if you don't ask the right questions in the right way, you're always going to get the answers you want, which basically fulfills a false premise to begin with.
I agree. I think you're right. I think you're right about that. The only way to test is to give 10 people a room with a fridge full and 10 people a room without, and then compare results. Or have a flight without Sundays and a flight with Sundays and compare the results, because otherwise it's a polluted study.
Further, but you got to go one step further. Well, there's one thing flawed with that. If you're going to have a flight with Sundays, it's one that you've had for a long time, so people have come to expect it. You don't just do a comparison. Because people are always going to like Sundays if they didn't have them before.
Right.
If you take them away, that's a declaration of war. Right?
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. And this is where it gets into a whole deeper edition, but it gets back to AI. What's the one thing the airlines have right now that is a borderline legal definition of fraud? What is it? It's their frequent flyer programs. Right? They're no longer loyalty programs. They're marketing operations. Do you know what the redemption level is of frequent flyer programs? I'll give you a hint. How many Americans have an account, frequent flyer account, at either American, United, or Delta? Take a guess.
I'm going to go 75%.
Here it comes. You're wrong. 357 million. How many people live in America? 330 million.
Yeah. So
All
like
right.
120%.
So that means, that tells you everything you need to know. Right, wait. And how many unredeemed frequent flyer miles are out there? Miles that you earned, that I earned, that the airlines just won't let you redeem. You better sit down and fasten your seatbelt. Here it comes.
Click.
Whatever guess you have, it's going to be wrong. It's 34 trillion unredeemed
Wow.
miles. So the mafia loan sharks don't make this kind of return. And yet we're all addicted to the programs, right? And so what the airlines have done with AI and big data is they probably know, based on your travel patterns, that you're more likely to fly to Hawaii or want to fly to Hawaii than Des Moines, Iowa. Gee, what a surprise, right? But then their entire communication with you, either online or old school mail, is geared to steer you where they want you to go, where they think you want to go. However, they're not delivering on the promise.
Right.
So there's no regulation, right? The airlines, the way they set this up, it's if you loan me $10,000 and you pay me interest, right? But you're loaning me the money. And I carry that loan on my books as a liability in which I have no responsibility to pay you back. Is that a brilliant business model for everybody except you?
Right.
And that's exactly what's going on here. And so what AI does in this situation is it perpetuates the problem because it continually gives them what they want in terms of profits and maintains this addictive personality or behavior
Got it.
that people just can't shake.
So I think you're
They're
bringing
still
up
following a prompt.
I think you're bringing up a really good point, and that is, like, I'll just, my view is AI, they're tools in the hands of people who want to exploit their customer and think short term. They're really good tools to do that, and if that's your objective, they will be very, very effective at that. If your objective is to take care of customers and think long term, they're also very good at that too. But if that's the objective of the airline, and now we give them better tools to pull that off, I agree, they become more dangerous to consumers, and
Right. Now,
and that is a
here's
true
my
fact.
question for you guys. Name one Fortune 500 corporation that's using AI in a positive way to truly take care of their customers. And the answer is no, because they have to satisfy Wall Street. They have to satisfy the stock analysts. They have to show that they're making their mark every quarter.
Yeah.
They don't care who they have to kill in the process.
No, I was just going to say, it's a funny thing about adoption. I having been in like the place where I've been on the early phase of many technologies, the beginning is always this is how I explain it. I use different software products as an example. Salesforce would be a good example of this. There's a time when you have to prove to your boss the ROI of buying Salesforce. So you go into his office or her office and you say, hey, I want to buy this. And they said, show me proof. Show me the ROI. Show me what you're going to save. Show me how you're going to pay for it. And then it evolves and we get into that like lemmings thing where everybody follows each other. And now Salesforce has like made its way through. And now you walk in there and you have to explain to your boss why you haven't bought Salesforce. Why don't you have it? Everybody else has it. And I think that's where we are with AI right now. It's that we're in that stage where everyone's like, I want AI, I want to buy it. Well, show me how you're going to save money, not why aren't you using it? And that's dangerous, to your point. That's a dangerous place to be with such a powerful technology. Because at the end of the day, you're helping people that want to exploit their customers do a better job at it with a super powerful tool.
Well, I'll give you an example. This is an early example of AI, and it's still going on, by the way. As I told you before, I go to New York all the time. So I knew I had to come to New York to do a show for CBS. I didn't know at the time whether it was going to be on a Monday or a Tuesday. So I went online just to surf around to see what the fares were like. And I found a fare that was $428, round trip from LA to New York. It seemed reasonable, but I still didn't know if I needed to leave on a Monday or a Tuesday. And I wouldn't know because of the time change for another 4 hours, and the people in New York would be getting to work. So I waited 4 hours. I called. They said, yeah, you need to come in on Monday, not Tuesday. I then go back online to book that flight. It's now $478. Right? So I said, wait a minute. How did it go up $50 in 3 hours? So I, being the cynical person that I am, I called the airline and said, would you please explain this? And they had an answer. And it seemed reasonable. LA to New York is a very popular flight with supply and demand, last minute inventory, and you paid an increased price because there was demand. I said, okay, I'll take your word for it. What did I do the next night? To prove that they were wrong, I went online and I searched for a flight 3 months later in November from New York to Des Moines, Iowa in November on a Wednesday morning at 11 o'clock. Nobody's flying to Iowa on a Wednesday morning at 11 o'clock in November. And I got a fare of $228. I waited 3 hours. I came back, and the fare had jumped to $280. Nobody can argue that in that 3 hour period, there were 50,000 deranged travelers who suddenly had the urge to fly to Des Moines, Iowa 3 months later in November on a Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning. It gets worse. Obviously, I didn't book that ticket. I wasn't going. But from that moment on, every Tuesday, I get an email from the airline telling me about all the great things I can do in Des Moines. So there's your AI determining that I have an interest, pricing it accordingly, and then staying after me for it.
Yeah.
And proving the point that they priced it differently based on what they thought was my level of interest.
Yeah.
That's not taking care of your...
No, it's not. I have an interesting story similar. I went to ChatGPT and said, how do I get, what's the best way to get from, I think it was San Francisco to Denver, for the cheapest cost. And it said, first and foremost, use incognito mode. Airlines track you and will increase the price. It was number one in the recommendations. Like, it didn't say go to this site, go to this discount site, go off hours. It said go into incognito mode so they can't track you.
Yeah. Well, the way that ChatGPT learned about that was because when I wrote my story and I went on the air and talked about it, I said, from now on, if you want to search for a fare and you want to come back to it, use somebody else's computer or clean out your cookies. It's the same deal because they know it's you. So it's a little crazy. Now, let's flip that on the other side. What if the airline now knows I want to go to Des Moines, or they think I want to go to Des Moines? Wouldn't you think they would do it just the other way around and make the fare a little bit lower? Because in the travel industry and the hospitality industry, you don't make money when somebody goes once. You make it when they go again and again and again and tell their friends. What they've done is they have a short-term mentality and approach to generate the revenue then, and they don't care. But what they don't realize is we remember this stuff.
Yeah, we want our Sundays. This all kind of goes back to the trust.
There's no Sunday in Des Moines. But
you have to bring your own on board. But it kind of does go back to the trust thing that we open with, right? And it's really unfortunate that so many huge industries like the airline industry are using this technology in ways that are, we talk about it a lot on this podcast, that really to leverage this kind of technology in a responsible and truly meaningful manner, it requires some level of systemic change. And it requires a different relationship to risk. And you brought up being beholden to stakeholders and things like that. To make the kind of decisions that allow you to use AI in truly constructive ways, it requires a different way of thinking. And I think it's really upsetting. So, I mean, there's just
hierarchy, meaning AI should not be put in the hands of sales and marketing. AI should be put in the hands of the CEO who understands from a leadership position what they do want to do and what they should never do. Because if you put it in the hands of sales and marketing, they're always going to make their goals by using it, not necessarily the most beneficial to their customers.
Yeah, if you look at it,
they just can't help themselves.
Yeah, another way, and you say that people that are closer to the ground see more clearly, higher resolution, but they see a smaller window. and they don't see the big picture, right? And as a result, they make decisions in that low resolution way because they're not capable of seeing the big picture at high resolution. So you have a choice. You can either see a smaller picture at high resolution or a bigger picture at low resolution, but no human can see the whole picture at high resolution like an AI can. But it needs a human to make the ultimate decisions, and that human has to be incented in the right way and have the right objectives. Otherwise, it's a tool for harm. And the question I would say is it human nature that if I found a way to make a profit in an airline, let's say I found a way to make 30% profit margins in an airline, and I've been doing that for 2 years, and now I get replaced, doesn't the next person, isn't the human nature for them to try to get better than 30%? Like, how do they come there and say, no, I'm just going to come and keep 30%? You know, isn't it human nature for them to try to do better than me?
Well, you remember the Freddie Laker quote? You want to be a millionaire? Start with $1 billion and open an airline. You'll become a millionaire. and that's exactly what we see. The airline margins are so thin that when you see, most people don't realize this, that the airlines make more money on their ancillary fees than they do on selling tickets. I mean, by a large margin. So, for example, take a $100 airline ticket. The airline may only net $23 out of that $100 because it's such a heavily taxed federal excise tax ticket. So if they charge you $50 for a bag, that's not an airline fare. It just gets taxed at a local state sales tax rate. So they're retaining 93% of that transaction. So that's why you see these $10 fares on Spirit, but they're charging you $150 for bags, right? That's how it works out for them. Same thing with resort fees at hotels. They're playing this game as a tax dodge, right? And nobody's stopping them. And people get smart about it. The problem about AI is not AI. It's no context. People are not dealing with it perspective. They're just so enamored of the technology. It's like the ends justify the means. And what's particularly scary to me, you mentioned ChatGPT, is I could go online right now to ChatGPT and say, write a story about AI the way Peter Greenberg might write it, and that son of a bitch will do it. And where's my job after that?
Yeah.
Right? So the replacement aspects, it's no different than the kiosks, and it's no different than ticketing machines versus having a human interaction. And if we become accepting of that, then not only are they out of a job, pretty soon we're all out of a job.
Yeah.
And then we go from a country of innovation and making things to a country of just consumption of technology. And pretty soon there's going to be a civil war over basic things like water and food, because we're not doing anything with our lives anymore. When I was in high school, I'm a little older than you guys, everybody was cheating with classic comic books, right? You have to do a term paper on Gulliver's Travel. They went to the newsstand and for 50 cents bought the classic comic book of Gulliver's Travel and wrote it from that. Well, is ChatGPT any different? In its essential nature, it's not. Obviously, it's more sophisticated than that. But the point is, we're all replaceable. And so that's the thing that scares me the most.
Yeah. So I like your example, and let me kind of create an analogy around it. So if the game, let's say it's a game, it's a terrible game, but let's say it's a game, and the game is that the airlines or the hotel's goal is to try to deceive you into paying more money than you think you're paying and get more out of you, then you have budgeted, right? In other words, to get you to pay more than you can afford, and fool you into doing it, to trick you into doing it, because nobody will pay more than they can afford if they know, that that's what's happening.
Right.
And so now what we're looking at is a game of chess between the consumer and the business on who can outgame the other, right? Can the consumer outgame the casino, or does the casino outgame the consumer, right? the gambler, and they have an AI now, right? We know that if you're playing chess as a human against an AI, you're going to lose worse than you did before.
Miserably.
Yeah, miserably. Is there an option though for you to have an AI? Like, is that the way this goes, to play chess against the company?
That's the next step. It'll be the dueling AIs, right? My AI is smarter than your AI, faster than your AI, but there's two things here that are not part of that conversation: conscience and responsibility. And at a certain point, when you lose that, it's over, right? I mean, I can go tomorrow. Look, we see it in the news business now. We see it in fake news. We're seeing people who are coming up the ranks in journalism who didn't know journalism the way we know journalism. And so their first motive or their first movement when you want them to work on a story is to go to the web. That to me is a minefield.
Yeah.
I'm constantly telling my staff, the web was not invented. Use the phone, talk to somebody. And they look at me like I'm from another planet, right? And as long as we just mortgage our common sense to the technology, we become the prisoners of it. And once that happens, we become very enamored of the convenience and the expediency. And my experience is then at that point, you have now bitten yourself in the ass.
Yeah.
Numerous times.
So let me flip to
and by the way,
imaginary.
It's a natural extension.
No, go ahead.
I was about to say, it's a natural extension. There'll be dueling AIs. Have to be. Because
Has to be.
After people get beaten up by it, somebody's going to have to come up with an invention that says, hey, this is how you outsmart the airline computer.
Yeah.
And then they'll come up with another algorithm.
Some people enjoy that, but I don't. Some people like playing the game of getting more miles and getting the most out of your miles and flipping cards, and that's very few, I think.
Well, I'm doing a long investigative piece right now that we've been working on for quite some time on the actual definition of illegal fraud, otherwise known as the frequent flyer programs.
Yeah.
It's the biggest scam ever invented. You know that the airlines make more money from their frequent flyer programs than the entire market cap of the airlines? Think about that.
Massive. That's incredible.
And you're still not getting your mileage redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
American Airlines values their mileage program at $29 billion. The market cap of America is only 11.3.
Right.
This is
So
where
they're
it's
winning.
come to.
Stunning, yeah.
They're winning the game.
Oh, you bet they're winning.
Yep.
Really, they
The
can't
house
stop.
always
They're
wins.
addicted to it too, for other reasons.
Yep.
Well, it's such a strange and kind of unwieldy industry that it's hard to imagine it transforming in meaningful ways, which is, I guess, somewhat troubling. Yeah, we can give you kind of a more positive example of the kind of implementations that we'd like to see. So we have a coffee shop that's on the first floor of our European headquarters in Kyiv. It's called Humans, Coffee, and Tech, and the baristas there, they have access to our platform for orchestrating experiences with conversational AI. It is kind of a code-free platform, so they can build things on their own. But basically, they've isolated all the managerial tasks that they hate about running a coffee shop, and they've found ways to automate them using a bot that they've named Hugh, because Hugh's not quite human. And that has been a big success. And they're meeting weekly with the development team and together to try and figure out new automations, how to evolve current automations. It has kind of dissolved a lot of the hierarchy that was needed in that environment previously. And not only are the baristas more connected with one another, they're spending a lot more time in conversation with customers and clients.
Right.
The coffee shop is open to our staff, but it's also open to the public, and it's become kind of a community respite. It's on the front lines of the war, and we've been told by Anna Jankowska, who's the project manager there, that often when the air raid sirens go off, people don't want to leave. And they've also remained profitable during the war. So it is a small example in a certain sense, but it's also the core behind it, the idea of technology helping people have more time to interface with one another, so they're not like stuck using technology in the ways that they're currently
Yeah.
using it, where it's tedious.
Yeah,
and
but I think
monotonous.
it's important to point out that their noble cause is to improve the human experience, as by the name. That is not the examples you've given. That's not their prime objective. So,
Right.
so
But
they're
it's
using the
interesting, though,
tools
that
to
you
improve
mentioned,
it.
they started. Yeah, and what you just said is they started working with where they had weakness in operations, and it was that allowed them to have the free time to then do what they
Yeah.
should be doing all along, which is having conversations with their
Yeah.
customers. That's
But
great.
I'll tell you, not one of them decided to automate something to save money. Every single one automated it to improve their experience as an employee or the customer's experience, and the profit just happened. Nobody drew a line from these automations to the profit. They just trusted it. And
But
I
they're
think
also
that's, I
small
guess
enough
that's
to
hard.
do it, and they don't have to.
Correct.
And
No
look, they're
spreadsheet
also
jockey.
small enough to do it, and they don't have to do quarterly reports to stockholders.
No.
I mean, that's
No.
the difference. If you're small
Yeah.
enough, you can stay on top of it,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it
but
works.
I think that scenario is scalable if large companies are willing. One thing we prescribe is kind of starting internally and finding things that can be automated behind the scenes that will free up the time of people working in the organization to solve better problems. And then
As
also
long as
they become more familiar with the technology, they understand the shared vision around it, and then they can start turning that stuff towards customers. And ideally, I mean, if it's done in the interest of providing better employee experiences and not solely just cutting costs, then I think there is a different kind of profitability, both like real ROI and then also kind of like this better, healthier organization around the corner of that.
But it's got to start with leadership. The leadership has to understand what it is, and it's got to be managed from the top down. And if it is, then everybody gets the right message.
Yeah.
So
we're not at liberty to name them, but we do work with Fortune 500 companies who happily are taking this path. So hopefully that'll throw a little sunshine in your day.
Yeah, to kind of flip that, I think not what you said, Josh. Just to flip the idea of how can knowing that this is rare and knowing that there's dangers, how can AI put in the hands of somebody with the right intentions really help? Because I can't help but every time I have an interaction with hospitality, I can't help but think of 10 to 20 ways that could have been improved with technology if they adopted it. Now, to your point, I was going to ask you why they weren't adopting it, why it's taken so long for hospitality, but you've already answered the question, because the ideas I have are how to make my experience better, not how to make them more money. And so I think I now know the answer, that I have all these ideas on how they could make my experience better. They don't care about that unless that makes them more money. So that's not the problem they're trying to solve. And so, bingo.
No.
This conversation was already hugely helpful for me to understand. Any ideas on how to change the motivations? Like I can't help but almost imagine these guys to be like slumlords. They own a real estate property. They see themselves as owning an asset, and they're just renting this asset and trying to lower the operating cost of it as much as they can every month. And slumlords have this short-term mentality, right? They don't care. They don't want to fix anything unless they have to, and they don't paint anything unless they have to, and they raise the rent as much as they can. Is this like a real estate mentality that hospitality has?
It's more than that. It's an M&A mentality, meaning half the companies today are trying to dress up the pig to sell it. And as long as you're doing that, AI is not going to be benefiting customers.
It's very short term, because you're going to be sold on the multiples of your profit, and it's going to trail the last 1 year. And so they're like, all I got to have is a couple of good years, and I can dump this thing. That's pretty interesting.
Absolutely. it's fundamentally flawed, but also, let's be honest, it's inevitable. AI is here to stay. It's not going. It's not. I'm not opposed to it. I just question how it's being implemented and how it's being interpreted. I know it's coming. I mean, and it's here, and it's going to continue to grow. The question is, are we going to win the race to not be so excited to embrace it before we understand what we shouldn't do with it?
Yeah.
And right now we're not winning that race.
It's really interesting how this conversation has kind of like created this dichotomy in my mind now between, the experience of hospitality is like when it's really good, it's very human and it feels genuine, I think, in certain situations. But there's such a gulf apparently between like we're being sort of sold an experience, but really like everything about it, its architecture is designed to cut costs and not necessarily to make that special. Not that that's universal to these companies, but
to eliminate interaction. So, for example, what's your experience at a restaurant? If the waiter or waitress comes and has a conversation with you, physically writes down your order and tells you about it, or checks off boxes on a tablet, which one, right? You check off boxes on a tablet, that means they can track their inventory better, they can manage it better, they can maybe make the kitchen more efficient to do more turning of tables at night and generate more revenue. But would I go back to a restaurant that is only interested in processing my order and not the experience itself?
Yep.
And that's where we are right now, not just at restaurants, at airlines, at hotels, in every form of hospitality and transportation.
Yeah, they're trying to turn tables. They're trying to turn tables, as many tables as they can turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll give you another one. You get into a taxi cab in New York or any other city. Now, okay, I'm now excited that I can take my credit card and tap it and get out of the cab. But what else comes up on the screen? Mandatory tipping. What was that? Right? And they come up with the tip they want. Right? And it starts at 20%. My wife grabs my hand every time and won't let me do it because the presumption is they deserve 20% because it came up on the screen. And most of the time they don't, right? They're using technology to try to compensate for the fact that they're not paying their service workers enough money. And all of a sudden they're double dipping on me because I now have the expediency and the ease to do that. And it's done without realizing what that just did. So when you take away the conversation, you take away the interaction, you take away the opportunity to have a discussion about the service you're getting in a very uplifting and educational way, which builds relationships and gets people to come back.
Right.
In the short term, you made a sale. In the long term, I'm not coming back.
So let me ask you this. It's often said that we tend to focus on what we can measure, not necessarily what we should measure. And we tend to, because we can measure one thing that's less important than something else that we have a hard time measuring, we overemphasize the thing we can measure. We can measure money. We can measure productivity. We can measure tables turning. It's hard to measure experience and a customer experience.
Attachment to Sundays.
Are there tools? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that that stuff's hard to measure? Can technology help us measure that? Or is that something we've just got to get past and trust? Trust our gut more? Or
well, you know what?
What's the way through?
Well, it's a mix, but I'll give you an example. The technology is certainly there to do it, but you can't just throw technology at something that's already screwed up to begin with and think it's going to solve it. Here's the example. I get on the phone. I don't book my reservations online. I want to talk to a human being because what they're seeing on their screen is not what I'm seeing on my screen. I'm not seeing all the inventory. I'm not seeing all the choices. So I want to have a conversation. So I call the airline. They keep me on hold for 45 minutes. And right before they connect me with the human being, they say, at the end of this call, please stay on the line for a 2-minute survey on our service. I don't need a fucking 2-minute survey on your service. Your service already sucks. I'm going to spend another 2 minutes hitting a button. What is that going to confirm? That I waited 2 more minutes. So the technology is there to figure out if they did a good job, but we already know they didn't.
Right.
So what are they asking me to do? Tell me what they're asking me to do. To say I had a good connection on the phone? Right, the phone worked, but I had to hold for 45 minutes.
Yeah,
Tell me why you need a survey for that.
Yeah, I've used this example. I'm calling because you canceled my flight and you haven't given me an alternative flight. You don't need to ask me if I'm happy. Who's happy? Who's the guy who calls and says, I'm so glad you canceled my flight. I was hoping this would happen.
The only guy who's happy about that is the guy who want to go to his high school reunion. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, that's right. And he's probably still not happy that you canceled his flight because he knows, you didn't know that. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm an optimist, so I'm wrong most of the time.
Here's what I've done. And I know I'm a contrarian. You might even say a little bit of a curmudgeon. But I spend an inordinate amount of time developing relationships at airports around the world and continuing those conversations either by email or phone. So if I'm going to get on a plane tonight and fly on Delta anywhere, I don't use their app. I don't wait for them to electronically alert me. I call a guy named Rocky at Delta who runs the ground terminal at Kennedy. And I say, hey, Rocky, I'm on flight 105. He goes, no, you're not. That plane's a hangar queen. You're not taking that plane. You want to go on this one. So I found the one person who I can talk to who tells me in real time what my options really are, right? Every app that I've had from an airline alerts me to something I already know and knew 10 minutes ago. There's no help. They give me the app to avoid human contact. They give me the app to avoid conversation. And that's the culture that we're in now. People are terrified of having a conversation. And they use the technology as a buffer, thinking that's going to get them through it. No, that only defers an explosion. It doesn't end it.
When a tree falls in the forest and you don't hear it, it still fell. In spite of the fact that you didn't hear it.
Now, by the way, my philosophy has always been, I never want to take a no from somebody who can't give me a yes in the first place. So you can't do that online. You can't do that with an app. You need to find somebody in the chain of command who can tell you yes or no. And if the person who can say yes tells you no, it really is no. And you go with that. But right now, the system is stacked against everybody. They don't want you to call them. There used to be I think it's still an online service called gethuman.com. You know about that?
Yes, 100%. Yes. I brought it up many times. It's all the hacks on how to get around the IVR. Yeah. In fact, you could say that app got me into this business. Yeah.
There you go. So, and by the way, that app's 20 years old.
Yes.
So the thing
That's how long I've been doing this.
20 years ago. But we knew 20 years ago. They didn't want you to have a conversation. They didn't want you to have any contact whatsoever. They figured it might just go away.
Yeah, I always said the IVR is like the most hated experience on the planet. Nobody ever says I love them. I've never heard one person say, you know what I love? Talking to an IVR.
Here's what I do when I make a phone call now. You ready? Here's every phone call I make. Here it comes. Dial the number. Representative. No, representative. No, motherfucker, representative. This goes on now. And finally, after about the
I've
sixth
seen
time,
those
they'll
transcripts.
go, oh, we're...
I love that example of Rocky, though, of having those boots on the ground, like having, just knowing people. And I think like you bring up the kiosks being such an eyesore and like such a bad experience. Like, I think the thing that we come back to a lot about the power of conversational AI is that it can put that kind of stuff more in the background. Like people can be having conversations with technology that can facilitate brief moments, little micro interactions, but they're really are hopefully more present in the world and able to have connections with other people. And in that example, it seems like Rocky, he is helping you make a better decision based on like what he's seeing. He's looking at technology.
He's right there on the ground.
Uh-huh.
But you know what it is? Let's get right down to basics. At the end of the day, we're all 9 years old and we want our blankie.
Yeah.
We want our blankie. And that means we want somebody to either literally or physically or figuratively hold our hand and say, it's going to be okay. Turn left, don't turn right.
Yeah.
Right? And the app doesn't do that.
No.
Do they still have blankets on planes?
No, I didn't say your blankie.
No, I know. I was just wondering. It made me think that's like another thing I don't think you get anymore on an airplane.
You wouldn't want to touch those blankies. The Center for Disease Control is taking them in the laboratory now. But you get the point. I mean, people just want to know, is it going to be okay? 95% of all travelers, they just need reassurance. And no amount of AI right now is currently set up, even though we know it can do it, no amount of AI is right now set up to do that.
Well, it's not their
because
objective
it's not in
to
the,
use
in the
it for that.
interests of...
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
And all you need is one company with with inspired leadership to realize that if you do that, you will have true brand loyalty, and people will just swear by you.
Yes.
Right. It's that my example with Rocky. I became friends with him. We're Facebook buddies. We're on WhatsApp, and I'm telling you, he tells me even the aircraft number not to take, right? Because he knows, right?
Yep.
And I trust that any more than anything else.
Yeah. So I see a number of things here. First, every interaction is transactional. There's no concept of a relationship. That's just a facade that's been told by CRM companies. But the truth is,
right,
every call is a brand new relationship, and there is almost no history that informs the next conversation. So everything's transactional, and it's all about counting transactions and reducing the number of transactions that happen. Not seeing every transaction as an opportunity, but as a problem.
Right.
And then you got marketing, so you got these companies paying to reduce the number of interactions with companies, also giving more money to marketing to increase the number of transactions to companies. So on one hand, they're trying to have more interactions. On the other hand, they're trying to reduce interactions. They're fighting against themselves because they don't understand that every interaction is an opportunity. It's not a problem.
Correct. And their brand messaging is at total odds with their delivery of service. Do you know what the brand message is for American Airlines right now? Ready? Helping you on your journey. Sounds like they're running a hospice.
So I think I have this right, but it sounds like the opportunity for a company to really break through and provide the kind of experience we've been talking about, the desired experience that incorporates conversational AI, might come more from like the hotel side of things than the airline side of things. It seems like they are kind of stuck in this death spiral.
But you know what? They're all starting at such a low bar that anything they did along the lines of actually trying to nurture, preserve, and perpetuate real relationships will be light years ahead of everybody else. And it just needs one of them to do it for them to realize, hey, maybe we're making a mistake here. We have to do that too. But then they also have to be able to deliver on the promise. The problem right now is they can't deliver on the promise. They don't have enough staff to do it. All right? They're overscheduling their airlines. They're overbooking their hotels. They're being greedy. It's as simple as that.
It's like fear-based and greed-based. Yeah, it's really strange.
Right. Look, airlines right now are hideously overscheduled at their hubs. And that creates gridlock that you can't even imagine. I'll give you an example. There's not a runway in the world, whether it's Philadelphia, Peoria, or Beijing, that can accommodate more than 23 takeoffs in an hour. Do the math. 2.5 minutes per takeoff, there's your 60 minutes. 23. Okay. So the airlines are allowed to schedule 34 flights departing at 8 in the morning. And nobody thinks there's a problem with that. Right? And the airlines that try to fudge their schedule by having the arrival time later so they can say we're arriving early when in fact they're actually arriving 40 minutes later than they did 20 years ago. But it gets worse because when they land, the problem is already cascaded because that plane hasn't left the gate, so they can't get to their gate. And that plane can't push back from their gate because there's gridlock at the airport, which means not only can the passengers not connect their flights, the flight crews can't, and you have meltdowns before we ever deal with the excuse of weather. All the ingredients are already there. Technology could solve that in a half an hour. You just got to get rid of the greed factor, right? Your publishing schedules,
thinking, really.
You know when you publish.
You could argue it's greedier to do it, right? If you're looking long term, you'll make more money. It's short term thinking, really, because I think the numbers prove out that you'll make more money in the long run if you actually do these things. I think there's more money into
I would
satisfying.
take issue with that because, you'd be surprised if they continue the schedule. The amount of money they'll spend on fuel burn and crews timing out and missed connections and missed baggage will sink them all.
Yeah.
And that's really not why we fly. So it's bad short-term thinking, it's bad long-term thinking, but these guys want to be competitive, and so they just throw stuff up against the wall and hope it hits. And they're publishing schedules with 33-minute connect times. Now, look, I failed math in high school, but I can do basic arithmetic. I was on a fully loaded plane the other day. It was a 737 MAX, 180 people crammed into that plane. A plane that was never designed to hold 180 people. And when we got to the gate, I waited till they opened the door. I took out my stopwatch on my iPhone, and I timed on average how long it took everybody to leave the plane. You know what it was? Per passenger on average? 23 minutes. How do you publish a 33-minute connect time? And yet they do it wantonly. I mean, it's insane.
Wow.
If you were an Olympic sprinter, they'd have to call the paramedics for you. So it's really stupid. And these are all areas under the airline or the airport or the FAA's control. It has nothing to do with the pandemic. It has nothing to do with weather. All those areas alone is enough to sink the ship. And there goes passenger service. Bye-bye.
So let me ask you a really, I think, complicated question here, which is everything's always got two sides to a story. So with that in mind, I sort of think, how much is experience? And I know in the examples you just gave, really those are relevant to what I'm going to ask here. But how much is the experience that we get from the employees that work on the ground a result of, the wrong incentives and the wrong poor feedback loops? And then how much is a result of those bad behaved customers that ruin it for the rest of us, that just, like, how much could we hold customers always right, I guess?
Well, not in that case. I'll explain. I'll give you an example of where airlines just don't get it, and I'll give you an example of where airports just don't get it, and they're both easy fixes. The story I'm about to tell you is true. I covered it. Happened a number of years ago. The last flight of the day from Minneapolis to Chicago was a Northwest Airlines flight, and the captain happened to be on the jetway as the passengers were boarding, and a man walks up to the pilot. He's got his son with him. He said, "Listen, can I ask you a question? I've got my son here. He's got to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He's very, very sick. He needs an operation. And the only way Northwest will fly me there is to fly me to Chicago tonight, make us overnight in Chicago, and then backtrack to Rochester, Minnesota tomorrow. I was looking at your in-flight map in your magazine, and I noticed you fly right over Rochester on the way to Chicago. Do you think you could stop?" He knew it was the last flight of the day. The pilot knew the plane wasn't connecting with any other flight. She said, "Hold on a second." He goes in the cockpit, doesn't ask permission, calls the air traffic controllers, tells them what's going on. I said, "Can you vector me into Rochester very quickly, in and out, to take a medical patient in?" They said, "You got it." He then gets on the PA for the passengers. Said, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the flight. We have a very special passenger on board tonight who needs to get to the Rochester Clinic or the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And I've talked to air traffic control, and they're willing to let us drop down to Rochester very quickly to let him off, and we'll go right back up. If everybody's okay with that, would that be okay? And everybody said, yeah, let's do it. So they did it. He lands in Rochester. They get the ambulances there. They take the kid off the plane. They're up in the air in 10 minutes, and they landed in Chicago 10 minutes early.
I love these stories.
Wait. Gets better. One of the passengers called me on the phone and told me what happened. I checked. Turns out it's exactly what happened. I wrote about the story. It was everywhere. And the FAA wanted to name this pilot the pilot of the year. And Northwest Airlines would not allow him to accept the award because he violated company policy. He should have been in every one of their ads. That's number one. Now let's get to your drunken, violent passengers. There's a very simple solution for this. We've had 7,000 plus cases of unruly, disruptive, or downright violent passengers every year. And it's up 37% this year over last year. So it's no longer about even wearing masks. Guess what they all share in common, with very few exceptions? They're all drunk. And they're boarding the plane already drunk. Very simple solution. You do the NFL fourth quarter alcohol rules. No retail establishment at the airport can serve anybody liquor within 45 minutes of the boarding time printed on their boarding pass. Short of putting breathalyzers at jetways, you've solved the problem. Nobody wants to do it. It's a simple solution which we all support. And yet every time a plane has to divert, it costs the airline $65,000 in landing fees, fuel costs, and lost time. These are simple solutions. You don't need an app for that. You need common sense for that.
What do you think about what Uber does, this idea of customer ratings? So company ratings, but each customer having a rating and then them getting incentives for having higher ratings.
It's such bullshit. It is. Let's call it what it is. Did I tip more? That's it. Right? Now, I mean, I could get a low rating if I came on drunk and threw up in the back seat. I get that. But the real reason for these ratings, it's a tip incentive deal. I have no idea what my rating is, but I'm a huge Uber customer, right? But bottom line is, it's somewhat phony. It's a phony rating.
So it'd have to be accurate, and that would be difficult. Yeah. I've always, I know this is a world I can't live in, but I've always wished I could fly an airline where people had to have a Uber rating of 4 and above to get on the airline. So I feel like everyone would just be polite. It's like it's probably the same thing as flying out of a small town in eastern United States, like Sheboygan or something.
But you know what? The airlines won't tell you this, but they have ratings for passengers. They do. They know who the bad guys are. And during the pandemic, you may remember the airline saying, we're banning that guy for life. He'll never fly this airline again. They're all back flying. Think about that. You know how many people of the 7,000 plus cases were actually arrested and went to prison? About 9. That's it. There's all the show. They want the revenue. Now,
got it.
What do the flight attendants now carry on the plane? Zip tie handcuffs. So they can actually lash you to the seat.
I did not know that.
So now they were asking the flight attendants to be sky cops. Oh, yeah. There are 2 things that planes are now carrying on board that are equally disturbing. The zip tie handcuffs, and in the medical kit, which tells you everything you need to know, Narcan. Because you have so many opioid overdoses on the plane.
Wow.
And
so they're becoming policemen.
If you have a medical professional on a plane, yeah. So there you have it. But in terms of outright violent behavior, 90% of it alcohol related. And they're coming on the plane already tanked.
Oh,
It's not a difficult solution.
Yeah, and it's such a stressful environment. It's just increasingly difficult, it
yeah.
seems, for flight attendants
Well,
to
think about this. They're
have
cramming in.
conversations,
Well, conversation, are you kidding?
like good
There are too many
conversations.
seats. Well, any conversation.
Yeah,
There are too many seats on the plane. The seat room and the leg room is a field day for orthopedic surgeons. It's you know that every airline is supposed to comply with this rule that they have to be able to prove every year they can safely evacuate a fully loaded plane with half the exits blocked and in the dark in less than 90 seconds. And guess what happens? They all pass the test. You know why? They get to choose who does the test. They hire the cast from Cirque du Soleil. I mean, stop it, guys. This is phony baloney, right? So we have the FAA, which thinks the airlines are their clients. They are not. We're their clients.
Yeah.
And the FAA has not learned that lesson. I love the idea that the FAA impaneled a new panel to discuss air safety. What do you mean? You need a panel to figure out you guys aren't doing your job? And you're leading the panel? That's the biggest joke.
Yeah.
So don't get me started on that. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think
thing
about the
I'd
way
say
that,
is, sorry, Josh, real quick. One thing
you can go ahead,
I
Rob.
would say, sorry. One thing I would say, I've always thought of gamification as a positive thing. I've always thought of it in the positive light, but I'm starting to see that there is a negative form of gamification. We don't call it gamification, but this whole airline point system and this whole, charging, this is a game between airlines and passengers on who can get the better of each other. And I'm now realizing that there is a negative gamification that is a race to the bottom. The race to the bottom of profit margins and the race to the bottom of negative experiences. And some things just shouldn't be gamified. And at this, healthcare, and these things that are experiential. And I think this is something that I think should be studied, is this idea of gamification gone wrong and gone bad because nobody wins. Nobody's winning right now. The airlines have poor margins. Customers are upset. The employees have grumpy customers and don't get paid well. There's no winner in this. There's just a game nobody wants to play.
If the airlines were being honest, many of them, not all of them, but many of them should change their entire branding message to, we're not happy until you're not happy.
Right. And we don't play games.
And because when you... Exactly. For me, the suggestion is just forget about our conversation. Just double the dose. Double the dose.
I was curious, Peter, if you've looked much into the way that Airbnb is using AI. I think they're doing things to try and get people better rates, allegedly, do background checks on guests, translate listings.
Well, they're doing that out of necessity.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the most recent survey, which I found really amazing, this number, 47% of Americans were asked, where will you be staying on your next trip? And they said at like a furnished apartment or a non-traditional hotel. That's a huge jump, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not doing it because they want to immerse themselves in the culture or they want to live in the neighborhoods. No, they're just sick and tired of the minibar mentality at the hotels. And they're hoping for a conversation. And you know what? If the folks running Airbnb can police the hosts to not be as greedy as the hotels, and remember, the hotels make money on those resort fees, the Airbnb hosts are getting very greedy now on cleaning fees. We've seen some Airbnbs charging $300 a week for cleaning. I mean, come on, guys. So we've come to a certain point of diminishing returns there, but Airbnb is positioned perfectly to take advantage of bad customer service at the hotels. And sort of the fraudulence of the frequent stay programs as well. So if they can use AI to make that work, more power to them.
And do you think that could have the benefit of driving change within the hotel industry? If Airbnb uses AI and finds a way to actually build better trust between guests and hosts and deliver a better product, does it get to a point where then it makes the hotel industry kind of reevaluate their business model, or is that wishful
You would
thinking?
think so, but guess what's happening quietly? Hotels are buying Airbnbs.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So you have
Gaming the
Marriott and
system.
Hilton, Hyatt. It's sort of like bad times here on Parade. But seriously, they figure out we can't beat them, so we might as well join them. We're just not going to call ourselves an Airbnb, but it'll be a Marriott managed property. But it's actually a house. So that's their way of dealing with it right now. And one of the reasons they're doing that is I don't think they can compete with them from a hotel perspective, just because of the way they're structured.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Having traveled with like family, it's a much better experience often, just being able to check into a house and
Yeah.
not have to go through the rigmarole.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I really like the more like less optimistic view of technology. I like to have these conversations because I agree with you. There's a lot of danger here, and I like to have these open conversations. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your candor.
I have a very optimistic view. Well, listen, I have a very optimistic view of technology. I have a very pessimistic view of how it's being manifested.
Yeah, the people behind it.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement, and I think there's a danger there that we got to address, and it's just technology's uncovering it more and more. And I'm with you. This was great.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
You got it, guys.
Thanks.
Happy to do it.
All right. Thanks again for hanging out with us right here on Invisible Machines. Thank you, as always, to the team at UX Magazine, especially Kate Timchenko, the marketing team at OneReach AI, Elias Parker in particular work very hard to make this podcast great, as does Michael Litvinoff, our video editor. Please subscribe to UX Magazine wherever you get your podcasts so that you can hear new episodes as soon as they come out. If you want to watch new episodes, and I recommend you do, the video feeds are really pretty amazing, follow the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. And I think that's all I have for you this week. So let's go ahead and look forward to next week when we will connect again right here on Invisible Machines.